Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. I just want to remind everyone that we have a stream going on, so if you just be cautious of walking around the middle of the room here. Welcome to the launch of ELSC's Britain Index of Repression, a new public searchable database documenting how Palestine solidarity is being silenced, criminalised and sanctioned across Britain, alongside a comprehensive report that provides contextual analysis of the data. My name is Taslima Udin and I'm the UK Advocacy and Communications Manager at the European Legal Support Centre, or ELSC, and I'll be chairing today's event. The ELSC is an independent legal organisation that defends and empowers advocates for Palestinian rights across Europe through strategic litigation, monitoring, research and advocacy. Today marks an important milestone. Britain's Index of Repression is the first publicly accessible database of its kind in this country. It follows the launch of our German Index of Repression last year, which documented similar patterns of crackdown. What we are presenting today shows that these patterns of anti-Palestinian repression are not isolated to one country. They are part of a broader and coordinated trend. Since the onset of the Israeli genocide in Gaza, repression of Palestine solidarity has escalated dramatically worldwide, and Britain is no exception. As expressions of solidarity have grown, so too has the intensity of the crackdown. We have seen workers dismissed, students disciplined, protests restricted, events cancelled, and people arrested. The goal is clear: to depoliticise the movement, dismantle organisational capacity, and completely erase Palestinian history, presence, and struggle from public and institutional memory. In collaboration with Forensic Architecture, the European Legal Support Centre is launching today the first fully searchable database documenting anti-Palestinian repression in Britain. This index is not simply an archive. It is a tool for journalists, researchers, activists, and the public to understand how repression operates, spreads, and can be challenged. We have an important group of speakers today who will walk you through the data and the lived realities behind it. First, we will hear from Bob Trafford, Assistant Director at Forensic Architecture and Forensis, the research agencies that develop the index platform. Bob will be joining us today remotely from Berlin and will speak about the database design and analytical framework behind it. Next, we have Tara Marwani, Senior Monitoring Officer at ELSC, who will present the main findings from the database, what the patterns show and why they matter. After Tara, we will hear from Sajia Iqbal, a teacher and ELSC client who will share her story publicly for the first time, a personal account of how this climate of repression impacts individuals and communities. And finally, we'll hear from Amira Abdul Hamid, ELSC's Director of Monitoring, who will speak about the mechanism through which repression operates and highlight key moments of resistance and successes. We are also deeply grateful today to be joined by several members of the community who have experienced repression firsthand and have agreed to be available for interviews today. Among them, we have Mark Bonnick, former employee suing Arsenal Football Club for unfair dismissal based on his philosophical anti-Zionist beliefs after being dismissed for expressing solidarity with Palestine. We are also joined by an activist from Palestine Pulse, a grassroots organisation that has faced more than 60 arrests since October 2023. A representative of the Filton 24 Defence Committee is also joining us, as well as Palestinian parents who were barred from school premises and shortly afterwards their child was isolated and questioned without parental consent after expressing support for Palestine at school. And finally, academics from Queen Mary University who are currently facing institutional repression for their Palestine solidarity work. And thank you all again for being here and for sharing your experiences today. After all our speakers have presented, I will open the floor to questions from journalists, and today we look forward to engaging with you throughout the session. Now, to begin, I'm pleased to hand over to our first speaker, Bob Trafford from Forensic Architecture.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm very sorry that I can't be there with you in person. Thanks for the kind introduction. I'm here speaking, as was mentioned, on behalf of Forensic Architecture, based at Goldsmiths, University of London, and our sister agency Forensis, based here in Berlin, where I'm calling. And together, Forensic Architecture and Forensis developed the software which hosts the vital data set which is being launched today. Forensics and forensic architecture are human rights agencies. We seek to expose and challenge violence and rights violations by states and their agents. We develop new technologies and tools for investigation and public dissemination. And we seek to put those tools in the service of movements and claims for accountability, human rights, transparency, justice, and free and open expression. And while our work today supports front lines and communities around the world, our origins are indeed in the struggle against the Israeli occupation of Palestine. Since 2011, we have published dozens of investigations and reports into rights violations and violence by Israel, not least in the last 2 years, where our work on the ongoing genocide has been cited in the case of South Africa versus Israel at the International Court of Justice, as well as by the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories and in major international media across the world. Only yesterday we presented new findings to a parliamentary event in Westminster on the ambush and massacre of Palestinian aid workers, including staff of the Palestinian Red Crescent and the UN Relief Works Agency by Israeli soldiers in March 2025. In the last 2 years, we've also reported on Israel's targeting of medical facilities, agricultural land, and how Israeli forces have dismantled the UN-led aid delivery system in Gaza and replaced it with a system designed to engineer mass starvation. These investigations relied upon the painstaking assembly of hundreds of individual events and incidents into datasets, which revealed broad patterns and gestured toward the intention behind those patterns, patterns which reveal themselves and indeed themselves reveal modes of conduct, system-wide characteristics, behaviors, and ambitions which may not themselves be legible in each individual incident. And what is revealed by the index of repression is something altogether similar. When expressions for the support for the rights of Palestinians, calls indeed for the operation of national and international law in response to countless well-evidenced and widely reported rights violations in the context of the ongoing genocide, when these expressions are suppressed and silenced, or the individuals involved are fired from their jobs, subjected to legal action, these events are often reported on as individual isolated incidents and justified on their own terms. As the data gathered together here in the index of repression shows, this is not the case. The data painstakingly gathered and verified by ELSC reveals the operation of a system, not something which is centrally directed, of course, but something which is organic, multipolar, self-reinforcing, and mutually exacerbating. A system which seeks to raise intolerably the personal cost to any individual who speaks or acts in light of their conscience in the face of extraordinary violence and the relentless violation of international laws and moral norms. A system which, by doing so, seeks to reduce civil society's capacity to call out genocide and to demand at the same time robust action by our governments, a system which, as such, facilitates and enables that genocide. And this is the importance of the index of repression, of the associated report, and of the continued vital work of the ELSC on this issue. Because civil society must insist on the visibility of otherwise hidden systems such as these through the thorough and robust documentation of the points at which the system reveals itself. Rights and liberties are always more easily violated in isolation, in conditions of exception. Today's launch should remind us that these events are not occurring in isolation at all. By rendering a systemic practice visible, ELSC has better equipped us to reject and oppose it. We at Forensic Architecture and Forensis are grateful for their tireless work. We are proud to be a partner in this publication. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Tara, and I'm the Senior Monitoring Officer at the ELSC. We're here today to present the first dataset of its kind, looking at anti-Palestinian repression across a period of 6 years and multiple sectors in Britain. We've recorded and verified 964 incidents between the 1st of January 2019 and the 1st of August 2025. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. We seek to use the index as a tool to analyze repression of Palestine solidarity transnationally, with the German database having been launched in May 2025 and further incidents now added up until January 2026, and additional countries being added in the future, including the Netherlands. Our data collection spans across multiple methods through a combination of reports to the ELSC and media monitoring, and verified by a dedicated monitor team. A detailed methodology can be found on the platform. I will now move on to highlight a breakdown of our data. Over a period of 6 years, we have recorded 964 incidents of anti-Palestinian repression in Britain. Within these incidents, we've identified 3 categories: actors, targets, and mechanisms of repression. Out of the 964, we've recorded the following. 23% of our data refers to the police or security as actors of oppression. 20% of actors are educational institutions. And the third most common actor category are Zionist lobby or lawfare groups, appearing 141 times in our database. The key targets show that nearly a third of people targeted are activists, 22% are students, and 13% fall within the category of academics, writers, and teachers. Both of the above categories correspond to educational institutions, being the second most common actor category. And finally, the key mechanisms of repression. The category of censorship, disinformation, and smearing is reflected in 27% of the data. This makes censorship, disinformation, and smearing to be the most common mechanism of anti-Palestinian repression recorded in our database. 119 of these incidents show journalists or media institutions as the actors of repression. Threats of legal action are represented in 14% of the data, and arrests and law enforcement intervention makes up 13% of the data. These numbers are just the tip of the iceberg, but they show a clear pattern of anti-Palestinian repression. We know this because how we monitor is not in a vacuum, rather through our own embeddedness in the movement. We've documented nearly 1,000 verified incidents despite only relying on mostly voluntary reports and media monitoring, and that tells us something significant. What we're seeing is not the full picture, but it is a consistent, incredible pattern. The data shows that anti-Palestinian repression is systematic, multi-sited, and repetitive. We've recorded incidents from 2022 in which Zionist blogs and social media users doxed activists for their support for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, or BDS, and are witnessing this same thing happening today, where Zionists are harassing activists on the streets of cities like Sheffield, Bristol, and Brighton. The same actors, allegations, and mechanisms appear again and again across different sectors, in different parts of the country, and across time. The database also gives the ability to search for particular incidents and keywords, whether that's actors like UK Lawyers for Israel or UK LFI, people targeted like musician duo Bob Vylan, or how many times the 2000 Terrorism Act was invoked as a legal tool of repression. You'll also find in-depth featured incidents and invite you to explore the various features of the platform. We believe this data is a vital resource for the movement, and we hope for activists to be able to use the database to push back, work across movements, and learn from each other. We hope researchers and academics to use this for future investigations. And we want the public and journalists to use this database to amplify and expose the systematic nature of the repression, contextualize it, and narrate the stories of the people who make up this movement. This database is a reclamation for the Palestine solidarity movement and reveals a broader architecture of repression. It shows that repression intensifies when people resist, and when repression intensifies, people persist. We at the ELSC will continue to monitor anti-Palestinian repression, and we rely on people to continue to report to us. The more people report to us, the more powerful the database as a tool becomes. It is a living, ongoing, and defiant document. The fact that the German index has already been used to defend people in courts and to challenge the narrative that these incidents are isolated and justified is a testament to that. But behind the numbers on ELSC's index of oppression are people that are resisting every day, and without whom this project would not have been possible. They are people that continue to speak up for Palestinian liberation and an end to the Israeli genocide in Gaza, and ELSC will continue to defend those who defend Palestine. Our next speaker reflects the resilience of our movement. She's now taking action against her workplace and is represented by the ELSC. Please welcome Sajid Iqbal.
My name is Sajid Iqbal. I have a background in both law and education. I work professionally as an educator, previously teaching A-level law students and history GCSE at an East London secondary school. Today, I am breaking my silence to confront the challenges and the systematic oppression that workers like me endure every single day in workplaces. With the help of the European Legal Centre, I can announce today that I am taking my employer to an employment tribunal to establish that their treatment of me was discriminating on the grounds of my strongly held anti-apartheid, anti-occupation beliefs. I didn't just simply wake up one morning and think I would become a leading activist in my community for Palestine and start removing Israeli goods from a supermarket shelf. Activism comes in various forms, direct or indirect. My activism roots back to my childhood. My heritage, my origin is from Kashmir, so I am very familiar with an occupied territory. I firmly believe that Kashmir will not be truly free until all of it's liberated, until all of its people are free from oppression and able to live with dignity and self-determination. And the same is true for the illegal occupation in Palestine. I was always taught to stand for injustices and call it out. Like many workers from across the sectors that Tara has mentioned, I was targeted by UK Lawyers for Israel and many other tabloids like the Jewish Chronicle for simply taking part in activism and advocating for the Palestinian liberation. This was an organised smear campaign to break my spirit and destroy my livelihood. Zionism may have the backing of politicians and billionaires, but you cannot simply eradicate the love, the passion every day people have for Palestine. For background, this all started on Saturday, 5th of April 2025, when I took part in the National Day of Action for the Don't Buy Apartheid campaign with Redbridge PSC. We went to a local Sainsbury's and removed Israeli goods from the shelves, put them in a shopping trolley, covered it with a Palestinian flag. We also handed a letter to the store manager explaining our action and calling for the supermarket to uphold the boycott. We didn't take any of the items from the shop, no complaints were made, and the police were not called. We filmed the action for social media as part of the campaign. During my Easter break, an organised, premeditated smear campaign was created against me by the Jewish Chronicle, Daily Mail, GMB News. I was doxxed online, my name and school plastered everywhere, in order to shame and intimidate me. I was in a state of shock. The backlash didn't stop online. I was also smeared by UKLFI, who wrote to my school complaining that I had committed aggravated trespass, a criminal offence, that I was a unsuitable role model for children, that I may even be spreading my pro-Palestinian views to pupils. The school then began investigating. for breaching the rules on political impartiality, a personal attack indeed. The biggest mistake, they were of the belief that not only I would be deterred from my activism, but also censored. Unfortunately for them, my perseverance and resilience continued with Palestine in every heartbeat. As a result, this caused me severe stress and anxiety. It affected both my mental and my physical health. And this is what they do to silence me and all the workers that speak out, who speak out and act out against a genocide that Britain has been complicit in. As a historian, I reminded myself of Martin Luther King's speech, famous quote on justice and equality. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Further to this, my character was attacked with the intent to cause maximum damage. I have been made to feel like a criminal and a non-law abiding citizen, considering I have not committed any criminal offence but simply exercised my democratic right. Our workplaces have become the norm for targeting workers for simply wearing a pin, badge, bracelet, keffiyeh, even a watermelon symbol. One worker was simply reprimanded for entering a car park playing Palestinian music in their own car. They do this not only to suppress your activism, but to deter you from the movement and make you panic about your livelihood. So you lose hope and focus. Their sole aim and purpose are to deter and frighten and punish people like me from supporting and advocating for our Palestinian brothers and sisters. The genocide is not over, there is no ceasefire, but we will not stop until Palestine is liberated in our lifetime. My faith teaches me, amongst other things, my income is written, so I have no fear. What is mine will stay. What is not will simply depart. Our children today are watching a live stream genocide on social media. We do not need to give them a history lesson on what a genocide is or the definition of genocide. My fear has always been, if the voices of our children are oppressed in safe spaces such as schools, they will find other means to explore. And this, in my view, is very dangerous. Educators must be supported in workspaces to provide and support informative and meaningful conversations that must take place in schools. Our children, young people, wear pins, badges in solidarity with the Palestinians. Yet they are criminalised even before they leave education. In Palestine, young people are arrested, detained, and subject to military courts, and much more. During my visit to Palestine, I witnessed the apartheid system of an illegal occupation and oppression. At the time, primary school children had to go through 6 checkpoints and be searched by armed soldiers on their way to school. My thoughts of how fearful and unsafe those children feel day in and day out. We take our safeguarding seriously in Britain for children, yet all we could think about was the Palestinian children's daily struggle for survival, to live and to breathe. Recently, I learned that Lockheed Martin produced colouring materials for children about F-35 fighter jets, which were circulated during British Science Week. Is this simply glorifying fighter jets, or is it a possible recruitment drive? Does material like this trigger a safeguarding referral? But it did when children wore symbols in support of Palestine. Workers continue to be targeted in workspaces because we choose to wear a Palestinian symbol of resistance. We are told this makes people feel unsafe. If we are continuing to challenge the oppression, the silence is never an option. It is more important today that trade unions support their members so they are not left to fend for themselves when they are targeted for Palestinian solidarity. My message is very strong and clear to trade unions. I urge you to support your members in strength and unity. Together, we are stronger. Alone, we are divided. I will not be silenced into believing that I am a criminal because I simply stood on the right side of history and always will. This is my story, and there are many others. Remember, silence is complicity. Do not be afraid to speak. Most importantly, I am here today. I made a promise to the Palestinian people that I would continue to advocate for them by using my voice, the most powerful tool I have. This I would honor till my last breath. Until then, I live and breathe for Palestine. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
Hear, hear.
Thanks so much, Sajia. This was really powerful, but I also know that reliving these moments of your life being kind of taken apart in public is not easy. So on behalf of everyone else, I'd say thank you so much for your courage in speaking out. And I guess, you know, also just to add that your story is testament to what we've been saying all along. It's a living proof that, you know, there are patterns of this repression that this database is hoping to make visible. Hi everyone, my name is Amira from the European Legal Support Center, and I just want to give a bit more context and depth to the mechanisms of repression that my colleague Tara has mentioned earlier. I know Tara has walked us through some of the numbers on the database, and I hope that you get to explore the platform yourselves. But I know that also these numbers can maybe feel a bit abstract. These categories can maybe only make sense to us. So this is why we published a report along with this database that I also hope that you get to check out afterwards, that really contextualizes and put things within the bigger picture of what we're seeing happen in Britain in relation to Palestine, but also broadly. What I want to do now is to use Sajia's experience to explain what those numbers actually mean, or at least try. Discuss or tell you a bit about the different types of repression, how they interconnect, and also the political logic that drives them. And again, this report that we published acts as a guide to interpreting this data that you see on the platform. It provides the historical context and analytical depth that helps us understand why this repression happens, not just how it happens or what happens. Because ultimately, as we keep repeating, this is not random chaos in Britain, although it does surely feel like it at points, but it is a coordinated, multi-sided system with a clear logic, and that logic, unsurprisingly to you, is built on two very specific allegations that we hear repeated over and over again. And as our data show, the repression, anti-Palestinian repression, is justified through the allegation of 1, anti-Semitism, and 2, support for terrorism. And you can think of these as the kind of master narrative that are attached to the Palestine solidarity movement in Britain, but also obviously beyond Britain, right? And they are, in the British context in particular, given force by powerful tools such as the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism, but also legislation like the Terrorism Act. And Sajia's case is a textbook example of how this system operates in stages, with these allegations kind of looming in the background even when they're not explicitly mentioned. And they are explicitly mentioned many times, as our data show. And so, you know, the first part, the first stage, she was doxxed and harassed by coordinated Zionist accounts and then amplified by media outlets as the infamous Jewish Chronicle. And in our database, we categorize this as smearing as one category, censorship, smearing, and disinformation, and then also another is harassment and doxing. And both these categories appear in the database in almost half the recorded incidents. And this is really significant because the question then is, why does this first stage matter so much? Why are these mechanisms of repression so pervasive? And we explained this in the report, that it's precisely because Zionism, at its core, is a political project that is built on the dispossession of Palestinians and their ethnic cleansing. And that is a reality that you can't square with basic principles of freedom or justice, right? They can't make the point that, oh, we are just, we are right, we are correct, no matter how hard they try. So Zionists resort to distorting the entire narrative, the entire Palestinian narrative. And in this way, they try to turn anti-Zionism into anti-Jewish racism. They try to turn resistance against colonialism into terrorism. And this is really kind of about shutting down the story, or trying to shut down the story before it can even be told. And they do this by making an example of people like Sajia. And this kind of harassment, as also Sajia was referring to, it really invades your private life. It turns your home, your phone, your online presence into a source of threat. And the goal, as also Sajia was saying, is to make you feel completely exposed, alone, to sever you from the movement, from your community, and shrink your world into a place of fear and isolation. And so, as I was saying, it's the essential first step. It is a way of publicly marking someone as a target, right? Labeling you as an anti-Semite, as a terrorist supporter, etc. And this really strips away your privacy, and creates a sort of a digital record of a so-called transgression of sorts that, again, implicitly invokes these allegations. The second stage is that this public smearing and doxing gave license to groups like UK Lawyers for Israel. I know we mentioned UKLFI a lot, but there's a reason for that, and they appear in the database a lot. UKLFI didn't really need to explicitly even say anti-Semitism or terrorism in their letter to Sajia's school, right? Because already the public campaign in the first stage that I was referring to had done that work for them. And they simply wrote to her employer alleging criminal conduct and a breach of political impartiality. And these are also distinct mechanisms in our database. One of them is threats of legal action, and the other is threats to employment. And this is really where we need to briefly talk about lawfare, right? So in this context, lawfare is when a group uses the legal system, so through filing complaints, threatening lawsuits, pressing charges, not because they genuinely seek justice or even expect to win in court. They do it as a weapon. It is designed to drain your money, waste your time, bury you in bad publicity, or simply force you into silence. And this is, again, precisely what organizations like UKLFI, or another example, so-called Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, this is what they do over and over again, and this is exactly what our data show. And so, as a result, institutions get scared of bad press or lawsuits, so they often cave preemptively. They acquiesce to the demands in these letters or these legal threats. And the whole point is to create a chilling effect, to make everyone feel like they're being watched, and that, as Bob was saying earlier, speaking up comes with a high cost. The third stage, and the final stage in Sajia's case, is that UKLFI's letter didn't just sit in a file. It prompted the employer to do something, right? So to initiate a formal disciplinary investigation. And in our database, this is yet another category that we refer to as sanctions at workplaces. And this is really where the institution itself becomes the enforcer. So a school, a hospital, university, these are really places that are supposed to be about education, care, or critical thinking. Instead, they get turned into disciplinary bodies. They use their own rules, their own codes of conduct to punish people for their political beliefs. So in one case, in Sajia's case, you see the entire architecture of repression, where a doxing campaign enables a legal threat, which in turn triggers an institutional sanction. And so there are many more categories in the database, but just to say that each one of them differs in severity and in its strategic function, and often individuals and groups face multiple forms of repression simultaneously, from multiple actors as well. And this is really what we mean by multi-sided system of repression. It's a diffuse network of actors, from media outlets to lawfare groups to schools and hospitals. And it's important to stress that anti-Palestinian repression goes far beyond the state and its security apparatus. They all work in concert, all these actors that I mentioned, even if they never speak to each other. Because again, it's all about this kind of logic, right? This interpretive framework that is presented to us about Palestinian liberation and Palestine solidarity. And there is an impact of this repetition, right? So we see dozens, if not hundreds of cases in each of our categories in the data. And there is an effect to this repetition, which is that it aims to cement a single dangerous idea, which is that this repression is inevitable and inescapable. It's designed, the system of repression is designed to make us believe that speaking out will always lead to punishment. And the immediate goal of this is to convince us that the Palestine solidarity movement is not a legitimate ethical and political struggle. They want us to believe that we have simply misunderstood the situation, even as we watch genocide unfold before our eyes and bombs continue to fall on Gaza. And the eventual, the bigger, the really important goal here of this campaign of repression is the erasure of Palestinian reality altogether from our public consciousness and institutional memory. But this is the most important thing, and what makes this work so vital is that despite this overwhelming repression that the movement faces, despite the arrests and the threats and the smears, there is so much resistance. And our report also kind of identifies some of these victories. So for example, document the for 24 activists who faced down immense state pressure and political interference. We highlight the incredible organizing around the Defend Our Juries protests, which built a really impressive mass movement of civil disobedience. And of course, just days ago, the High Court ruled that the prescription of Palestine action was unlawful, a massive legal victory won through collective action. We celebrate Professor David Miller's case, which established that anti-Zionism is a protected philosophical belief, and we have many more victories that we outline in the report. And I just want to end by saying that this database is itself an act of resistance. It's a collective tool to tell our own story. It's a tool to remind ourselves and the world that solidarity with Palestine is a foundational political and ethical imperative, and that despite everything, this movement persists. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to all the speakers for your contributions, especially Sadia, who was willing to share her story for the first time publicly. Now, before we move on to questions, I just want to briefly emphasize something that Tara touched on earlier. What this index reveals is not just a series of isolated incidents. It shows scope, it shows consistency, it shows a pattern, and that makes it a matter of serious public concern, precisely the kind of issue journalism exists to examine. Your reporting can ensure that this does not remain a collection of statistics. Through careful storytelling, you give visibility to the real human impact behind the data, the teachers, the workers, the students, and the families. We also encourage the community to continue reporting repression to ELSC. When individuals come forward, they are not just seeking support, they are actively rejecting normalization. Documentation is accountability, and accountability depends on visibility. With that said, I will now open the floor to questions. We'll take 2 rounds of a few questions at a time. If you just put your hand up if you want to ask a question, and please introduce yourself and your outlet before asking your question, and if possible, direct it to a specific speaker. Thanks.
Hello?
Thank you. I'm Sultan from Al Arabi Al Jadid in London. I have a question to Pope. It seems to me that you have a lot of evidence proving that the police is the most active actor against the Palestinian voices in the UK. Does it give you a strong legal basis to sue them?
thank you. Thank you very much for the question. Since it's a question that speaks to ELSC's data, I think it may be better suited as a response by one of my fellow panelists.
Yeah, we're going to take a few more questions and then we'll answer them.
Hello, salam alaikum. Thank you everybody for taking time. My name is Ibrahim and I'm here on behalf of Sovereign Media. For the last speaker, in the UK's context, is it possible if you can list the UK-based media outlets that endorse narratives created by Zionist blogs and other private actors and organisations designed to smear activists, teachers or journalists for the activists that are watching this video now and so they can be aware for the future?
Any other questions for now? Yeah, just.
Hi, Harun Sadiq from The Guardian. You mentioned that anti-Semitism is used to kind of dox people and all kinds of things. I just wondered, in terms of the database, were there any incidents where you didn't include them because you thought they crossed the line into anti-Semitism, or is this kind of every kind of example of someone being targeted for Palestinian solidarity? Thanks.
Hi, my name is Christine. I'm a freelance journalist, and I'm wondering, how do you determine when criticism rises to the level of smearing? Is it when there's identification, or do you have other criteria?
Thanks all for the question.
Just sorry, 1 second. Just for the first question on the merits of, we've got our senior legal officer for Britain who's going to answer that question.
I'm sure you promised that I wouldn't have to give any legal advice, and I definitely won't. But actually, lots of people are taking steps to sue the police. That is happening in all sorts of forms against all sorts of police forces that are perpetrating arrests unlawfully and imposing bail conditions that restrict people's freedom of speech. I know that a representative from Pal Pulse is here, and they've been doing incredible work taking action against the police in lots of different settings, and that's something that comes up all the time. There's also been a lot of concern recently about the way that some police forces have said that they want to more heavily police, arrest and charge people for using terms like intifada, and there's certainly ongoing considerations about when and where legal challenges are going to be appropriate to some of these decisions that are being made by police forces. So it's definitely something that us and people in our legal network are really strongly pushing back on, and yeah, that's what I can say for now, I think.
Thanks so much. The next question was from Ibrahim to Amira.
Yeah, thanks Ibrahim, and for giving us a chance to name and shame. Of course, it's the Jewish Chronicle, right? This is, although it's really interesting because in the report we point out to 100 years ago when they're actually anti-Zionist, but that's a different story. So yeah, the Jewish Chronicle, Daily Mail, Daily Express, Telegraph, all the usual suspects you would expect, but also unfortunately sometimes, a lot of the times, it's other media outlets that might not be engaged in very explicit smearing and doxing, for example, although sometimes that happens, but that are also complicit by using certain narratives about Palestinian liberation and its allies, right? Yeah, so thanks for that question.
I can take the question on how do we decide if something is smearing or not. It is not our role to decide what is and what isn't anti-Semitism or support for terrorism or any of the other allegations that you'll find in the database. It is simply our role to document it and to show that it doesn't matter if you wear a watermelon sticker on your shirt, that might give rise to the allegation of anti-Semitism versus something else. It's simply about showing the scale of it and how that should give enough of a cause to question the allegation itself and to question the smearing itself. So we ourselves don't decide what is and isn't fitting within a particular category or not. We're just here to document it.
Yeah, and just to add that we have a very specific definition of what anti-Palestinian repression is, and you'll find it on in the methodology tab on the platform, but also in our report. And so that really informs how we categorize each of the incidents that we come across. Right.
The next question was on anti-Semitism.
I think we've sort of answered that together.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine then. Okay, cool. Just the final round of questions. If anyone has questions.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Hi, Ariba of Middle East Eye. Just going through your index, I noticed that more than 300 cases were in London. Would you be able to kind of shed light on which specific part of London? Did you notice, for example, whether or not these victims were mainly people of colour, or was it a variety? For Sajda, thank you very much for sharing your story. I think a very simple question from my end would be, why do you think you were targeted? And why do you think you were at the receiving end of the accusations that were given to you? Thank you.
Hello, Rabi Eid from the New Arab. I want to ask, and it's open for any one of you, about have you found any connections between these smear campaigns or these groups who targeting pro-Palestinian activism in the UK with the Israeli government or with Israel in general by media or some political figures or campaigns from Israel itself? And just want to mention, we published last week investigation about how the Israeli government pay other parties to do smear campaigns. So have you documented or found any of these connections with the Israeli government?
Thank you. For the whole panel, Tom from the World Socialist website. Firstly, thank you for the work you've done. I think this is a very significant achievement. The repression you document here is bad enough. It seems there is an additional aspect to it whereby this campaign can be used to set precedents for attacks on democratic rights in broader context, which I wonder if you could speak about. Two examples that spring to mind are the injunctions against persons unknown, which were used quite widely against student protesters for Palestine. That a similar injunction has now been used against supporters of an ongoing strike in Birmingham. The other major issue, I think, is of course we're meeting under the looming threat of a potential US-led war against Iran, and it seems the whole architecture that has been built up here could be very easily applied to attacking an anti-war movement.
Yeah, it's Crispin Flintoff show. I just wanted to ask if there is a recordings of the impact of all this harassment, because speaking about the mental and physical impact of it, I know a lot of people who have been attacked don't want to show their weakness and will always make out it hasn't had any effect. Is that something that maybe should be looked at if people could see how damaging it is? And I don't know the extent of it because people do keep this to themselves.
Okay, we'll go to, I think, Arib's question first on Amira, do you want to take that? Or? No, the...
What was London?
Yeah. Do you want the question again?
No, it's fine. So you're talking about the geographical reach of the repression?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which specific part of London did you notice those cases?
We don't have that data, and also it makes sense that London is targeted the most because there is a lot of activity in London as well. But I think aside from that, it's also a kind of limitation of our documentation because it depends on access. And so we have the most access in certain parts of Britain, but that's not to say that repression doesn't happen intensely elsewhere as well. So I think it's about who reports to us, who hears about us to report, and also what gets amplified in the media as we're doing media monitoring. So as we always say, this is the tip of the iceberg, right? So it's indicative of a pattern. It's indicative that London is probably the place where most repression happens, because it's probably the place where most of the activism happens as well. But that's not to say that other parts are not targeted as severely.
And just on the protected characteristics of race and people of colour, and so that's not something that we monitor right now, but it is something that we've spoken about potentially looking at in the future, because it also depends on how much information people want to give to us and what they want to report to us. Yeah.
But also, and to emphasize, and this is something we emphasize in the report as well, is that this repression is already rooted in structures of oppression, existing structures of oppression, right? And so these existing structures already target the most marginalized in our communities. That includes migrants, that includes people of color and Black people, and that includes, different classes, genders, and so on. And so you'll see that even though we don't document this precisely, anecdotally and through our experience and embeddedness in the movement, happen to the most marginalized people, but also to everybody else, which is also interesting.
Sadia, do you want to take the next question?
Thank you. So why was I a target? I was a target because I was not only simply advocating for the Palestinian movement, but also it was a boycott action. So we were educating people on what boycott action is. So simply just putting Israeli goods in a shopping trolley and handing a letter over to the manager and saying, could you support this campaign? And continue to speak to your head office because we're not happy as consumers that you are selling Israeli goods. I must also point out that Co-op is the first supermarket that doesn't stock Israeli goods, and I'm hoping in the future there will be other supermarkets that will follow. Also, I want to highlight that I didn't represent, on that day that I took part on that boycott action, I didn't represent my employer, I represented me. I represented for something that I stand up for. And sorry, is that okay to take the second question? Yeah, okay. So why me? Why was I a target? Well, is it because I look like this? Is it because of my pro-Palestinian beliefs? Or is it because I was in employment? Is it because when the action took place, whoever was smearing me and coming after me, did they actually know that I was employed? I think they did. Thank you.
I'll just take the question on kind of looking at the connections between the Israeli government and the state. So we ourselves don't document that, but we see ourselves as part of an ecosystem movement. And so there are many, many incredible outlets and many incredible activist groups that are doing that work. So I would point to Declassified as one of the organizations that are doing the investigations into the Labour Friends of Israel or any of the other politicians that have some connections to the Israeli embassy. Al Jazeera has also produced some really incredible research on that as well. But also a lot of activist groups are uncovering that themselves. So on connections of the arms industry and politicians and where they might be able to make money, and where we would find them with the connections to the Israeli government and the genocide in Gaza. So yeah.
Yeah, I'd also just like to add that even though, of course, this architecture is global, it's not just local, it's not just central to Europe. And so, of course, there are connections to Israel, but it's important to emphasize that the British state is the sponsor of this as well. So it's not just about interference. It's very much embedded here. It's also, Britain is the historical sponsor of Zionism. It's the creator of Zionism. And so it's really important to keep remembering that. But then, of course, there are these networks. I would like to go to the question about the impact on the on other or broader movements. And just to say that Palestine and the Palestine Solidarity Movement, one of the reasons, it's not the main reason, but one of the reasons that the repression is so severe is because the Palestine Solidarity Movement has the ethical and political coherence that brings together so many segments of society, so many different movements, the labor movement and other movements that would be crucial in dismantling the structures of empire. And so that's one of the reasons why the repression is so severe. And we have seen, as you're saying, some of the tools, legal tools used against other movements. But more importantly and more broadly, I think it's important to note that we were describing a process of depoliticization, right? That's the kind of immediate goal, is depoliticization. And that means that this can be used over and over again, these kinds of processes of depoliticizing movements, turning them, securitizing them, turning them into threats, turning them into hatred, turning them into et cetera, is something that works really well with the rise of the far right, with the rise of fascism. This is so central to the success of these reactionary projects. And it's being done with Palestine and the Solidarity Movement, but it's definitely happening, and has actually happened also in the past. So this is not novel in that sense, right? And then there's the question on impact.
Yeah, do you want to take that one? But also there's Tom's question on the injunction. Anna's going to take as well, if that's okay.
Hi, yeah, so the injunctions against persons on that is something that's had a lot of broad impact, especially against the climate justice movement, and the injunctions that were used against those groups were then also weaponized against students. And what was quite extraordinary about that is that it was moving from private organisation and private property rights to educational institution which has duties to protect freedom of speech and academic freedom on campus. And so one of the reasons why ELSC intervened in those cases was to try and at least have a presence in the court to be able to put forward some of the human rights arguments. But we really, in some ways, kind of those cases exposed the way that our legal system privileges property rights, and it's really an ongoing site of fight and battle on that front to push back against that, the limits of the law in that respect. And there's an interesting case that Friends of the Earth have taking to the European Court of Human Rights about the right to a fair trial, and the fact that these defendants aren't known, can't turn up to court without huge cost in order to fight against these injunctions. And we're definitely kind of looking with interest about how that case progresses, because it obviously will have impact for the students campaigning for Palestine on campus as well. And it is part of this broader fight, and we were certainly conscious when we were in court that we wanted to be alongside our colleagues in wider justice movements in order to make sure that that is a coherent struggle. But it is one that's ongoing, and it is a real disappointment to see universities engaging in these kinds of tactics against their own students and weaponizing their codes of freedom of speech against protesters. So yeah.
Do you want to take the impact? Yeah, or Tara?
So we're not currently documenting impact. Also, where do you start, right? It's a really difficult thing to document. But I think one of the things about the database and our work in general about showing the systematic nature of this repression, and maybe our ELSC clients here can speak to this afterwards, is that it empowers you in a way, right? It shows you're not alone, because as I was saying, one of the main things about this repression is to isolate you, to sever your connections with the movement and with your community. But by presenting this data, by saying, hold on, you're not alone, this is happening, you have not done anything wrong, you have done the opposite of that, you're taking an ethical stance. I think that in itself empowers people, even though a lot of that repression is really difficult. But I think, by showing them solidarity, by showing them that it's systematic, by doing our best to help, by doing our best to be visible and to be reachable and accessible to people, I think that in a way maybe tries and lessen that impact. But we haven't yet directly measured that.
Okay, if there are no further questions, that concludes the formal part of today's press conference. And thank you again for everyone for attending. Thank you to all our speakers for your important contributions. And our clients and other speakers will remain available for interviews, so please feel free to connect with us directly. Thank you so much.